The late-night studio buzzed with energy, the spotlight glinting off polished floors and screens flashing Fiona Carrington's name. She was a force, sharp, fearless, and known for cutting through her guests with wit as sharp as her heels. Tonight promised to be no different. Her target, Clint Eastwood, a Hollywood legend with a lifetime of roles and a reputation as rugged as his on-screen cowboys. But to Fiona, he was something else, a symbol of old ideals and a golden opportunity for ratings. Backstage, she scanned her notes, her lips curling into a sly grin. She was ready, and so was her audience, primed for the takedown they expected. Meanwhile, miles away on his sunlit ranch, Clint sat calmly at his kitchen table, the show's invitation resting beside his coffee. His longtime assistant, Jack, hovered with concern. "Fiona Carrington's show?" Jack asked cautiously. "She's not exactly friendly territory." Clint, with a soft chuckle, replied, "Territory's territory. A conversation's what you make of it." Jack frowned. "She'll poke at your politics, your movies, probably even your age." Clint's eyes glinted with a quiet confidence. "Let her. You don't win by dodging a fight. You win by showing up." The day arrived, and the studio buzzed with a crowd itching for fireworks. Fans and critics alike packed the seats, ready for a showdown. Backstage, Fiona, adjusting her mic, joked to her producer, "He's 94. I'll have him scrambling before the first break." Across the hall, Clint waited, sipping water as he watched the live feed of Fiona charming the crowd. Jack paced nervously. "She's already got the meeting from her hand," Jack muttered. Clint, eyes on the screen, replied simply, "That's her job. Mine's to speak my piece." Then came his introduction. Fiona's voice rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a Hollywood icon tonight. An actor, a director, and a man with more opinions than Oscars." The audience chuckled on cue. Clint stepped out, tipping his head slightly toward the crowd. The applause was warm, though not without a few scattered jeers. He greeted Fiona with a firm handshake and a slight, knowing smile. "Mr. Eastwood," she began, her voice smooth but charged. "Quite a career you've had. 6 decades. Impressive. Ever think about, I don't know, retiring and letting the new blood take over?" The audience laughed. Clint, unfazed, met her gaze. "Work's not about age. It's about having something worth sharing. When you've still got that, why stop?" A polite ripple of claps followed, but Fiona wasn't letting up. "Sure," she pressed, "but times change. Your early films, they're classics, but let's be honest, they don't exactly scream progress." The audience chuckled, clearly on her side. Clint leaned back, his voice steady. "Movies capture their time. Some parts age rough, sure. But growth doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from learning from it." The laughter softened. A few heads nodded in the crowd. Fiona, quick to keep control, pivoted. "All right, fair point. But let's talk politics. You've been pretty vocal over the years. Ever worry that being so outspoken has cost you some fans?" Clint's eyes met hers directly. "Maybe it has, but I've never aimed to be popular. I aim to be honest. If that costs me some applause, so be it." A murmur ran through the room. Fiona, leaning in with mock concern, fired back. "But don't you think that kind of stubbornness makes you seem out of touch? The world's moving forward. You sure you're not clinging to the past?" Clint smiled, a hint of warmth behind his words. "Clinging? Number staying grounded. Progress is good, but rushing forward without remembering what built the road? That's how you lose your way." The crowd, which had started the night on Fiona's side, paused. The laughter had faded into something quieter, something closer to respect. And the duel had only just begun. The tension between them was electric. 2 generations, 2 worldviews, locked in a battle of words. But Clint wasn't rattled. His calm was his sharpest weapon. Fiona, sensing the shift in the room, kept her grin tight. "All right, Clint," she said, her voice smooth but pointed. Let's talk about those westerns you're known for. All those tough guys, guns blazing. Ever wonder if you helped sell some outdated ideas of what a man should be? The audience chuckled, expecting an easy takedown. Clint, however, didn't flinch. Those characters? He said, his voice steady. They weren't about being tough for the sake of it. They were about standing for something. Independence, courage, justice. If those values are outdated, well, that's a bigger problem than my movies. The laughter died down. In its place, a thoughtful hush. Fiona pressed on, her eyes flashing. But come on, Clint, she teased. All that violence. You really think it was just storytelling? Don't you worry that maybe you glorified it a little? Clint's gaze stayed firm, his voice warm but certain. Violence is part of life, Fiona. But my stories, they weren't about celebrating it. They were about facing it, about what a man stands for when the world turns hard. Life's not simple. Stories shouldn't be either. The room was still. The audience, once so quick to cheer Fiona, was listening differently now. Fiona, sensing the shift but unwilling to let her footing slip, changed course. Fair enough, she allowed. But let's move from fiction to fact. You've been pretty loud about your political views over the years, and let's be honest, they don't exactly match up with this crowd. A ripple of applause and a few jeers followed. Clint smiled faintly, eyes locked on hers. I've never believed in hiding who I am. I say what I believe. And if that means some people don't like me, so be it. Being real means more than being liked. The audience murmured, a blend of agreement and unease. Fiona, leaning in with mock sweetness, added, But don't you think that kind of stubbornness makes you irrelevant? The world's moving forward, aren't you just stuck? A soft chuckle escaped Clint's lips. You call it stuck, he said. I call it rooted. Moving forward's good, but if you rip up every root on your way, don't be surprised when the ground collapses beneath you. The audience, caught off guard, fell into silence. His words were simple, too simple to ignore. For the first time, Fiona paused. The playful edge in her voice softened. All right, she said. So, you don't mind being called old-fashioned? Clint smiled, his voice easy but steady. Old-fashioned, he repeated. Maybe, but I'll tell you something. Foundations are old too. And without them, nothing stands. The room, which had started the night roaring with laughter at his expense, now sat in something closer to awe. And Fiona, queen of the comeback, felt it too. The air felt different now, thicker, heavier, with something more than entertainment. Fiona, usually quick to twist the knife, found herself listening. But she wasn't done pushing. All right, Clint, she said, her voice soft but sharp. You talk about roots and values, but times change, and some people say your views, a little behind the curve. You ever wonder if holding on so tight is just holding us back? The crowd stirred, ready for a blow. Clint's eyes, weathered but steady, met hers. Change is good, he said, his voice like worn leather. But change without memory? Without understanding where you've been? That's not progress, that's just wandering. The audience, silent. Fiona, eyebrows lifting slightly, felt the weight of his words. She shifted gears. But Clint, you've had your share of criticism, people calling you outdated, even irrelevant. How do you handle that? Doesn't it ever get to you? Clint's lips curved into a faint smile. People can say what they want, he replied, his voice even. But I don't let their noise decide who I am. You lose yourself listening to every voice but your own. The crowd, quiet, but not cold, listening. Fiona, softening without losing her edge, pressed on. But not everyone has that kind of certainty, she said. A lot of people, especially now, they feel lost. What would you tell them? Clint leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. I'd say this. Purpose isn't something you find overnight. It's something you build. You show up. You work hard. You fail. You learn. And piece by piece, it finds you. A few heads in the crowd nodded. A woman wiped at her eye. Fiona, her voice dipping into something less rehearsed, asked, "But what if you don't know where to start?" Clint's reply came soft, but certain. Then you start where you are, and you keep going, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The room, once crackling with laughter, now hummed with something deeper. Fiona felt it. The audience felt it. But what came next, no one expected. Mind if I tell a quick story? Clint asked, his voice easy. Fiona, curiosity flickering in her eyes, nodded. Go ahead. Clint's gaze drifted, his voice carrying the weight of years. When I first came to Hollywood, I wasn't Clint Eastwood. I was just a kid. No money, no name, no clue what I was doing. Got told, you'll never make it. You don't have the look. You don't have the voice. The audience, still. But I didn't quit, Clint continued. Not because I thought I'd make it, but because quitting didn't feel right. So I worked, I learned, I failed, and one day I got a shot. His eyes glinted. Not because I was ready, but because I was there. A pause. The world tells you success is about talent, fame, but that's wrong. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you're losing. The audience, silent, hearts caught in their throats, and Fiona, for once, had nothing to say. The room, once filled with quick laughs and sharp jabs, now held something raw, something real. Clint's story had cracked the surface, and everyone felt it. Fiona, her usual armor of sarcasm loosened, spoke with a softer edge. That's a powerful story, she said. But surely there were times you doubted yourself, moments where quitting felt easier. Clint's eyes softened, his voice low but sure. Of course, he replied. Doubt's part of the deal. But here's the thing. Doubt's not your enemy. It's your teacher. It's the voice that asks, how bad do you want it? The crowd listened, not as an audience but as people. People who knew doubt. Fiona, leaning in now, asked, So, what keeps you going when everything's telling you to stop? Clint's gaze met hers. Knowing who you are and why you're doing it. If you lose your why, you lose your way. The silence in the room was thick, not heavy, alive. Fiona, almost introspective now, said, But what about when you don't know your why, when you feel lost? Clint's voice, steady as ever. You keep moving. You show up, even when it's pointless, especially when it's pointless, because purpose is something you build, and the work is the compass. A young man in the crowd, barely older than 20, nodded, his eyes damp. But Fiona, determined to challenge him, wasn't finished. All right, Clint, she said, her voice tightening again. But isn't there a cost to that kind of stubbornness? You've turned down roles, walked away from deals. Haven't you ever wondered what you missed? A faint smile tugged at Clint's lips. Maybe I missed a paycheck, he said, but I never missed myself. The crowd stilled. Let me tell you something, Clint added, his voice low but powerful. I've seen people, good people, trade who they are for success, but they didn't get success. They got lost, because when you lose your integrity, you lose the thing that made you. The audience, quiet, sat in something far deeper than entertainment, and Fiona felt it too. Her voice, so often a blade, softened. So, integrity matters more than winning? Clint's reply, simple and sure. Every time. A pause. Then, applause. Not the wild kind, the real kind. And Fiona, for the first time in her career, felt changed. The applause lingered, not as noise, but as understanding. Fiona, who had built her career on sharpness and spectacle, felt something unexpected: respect. But there was one question left, and it wasn't about politics, movies, or fame. It was about him. "Clint," she asked, her voice quieter than it had been all night, "you've lived through so much: success, criticism, change. What's the most important thing you've learned?" The room waited. Clint paused, his gaze distant, his voice warm. "That the loudest voices," he said softly, "are rarely the ones worth listening to." The crowd, silent, hanging on every word. He continued, "I've been in noisy rooms, film sets, debates, stages like this, and I've learned noise doesn't mean truth, and shouting isn't the same as knowing." The stillness in the studio felt sacred. Fiona, her usual confidence softened by something real, asked, "Then, how do you find the truth, when the world's so loud?" Clint's reply came low, steady. "You listen. Not to win, not to reply, but to understand." Fiona's eyes flickered, and for once, she wasn't the one speaking. The crowd, sensing the shift, sat motionless, hearts full. Then Clint, after a small, thoughtful pause, added, "And don't let the world rush you. We race to answer, but the truth, it lives in the quiet." The air was heavy, but not with tension, with connection. And then, softly, Fiona said, "I think you've given us all something to think about." Clint's lips curled into a small smile. "That's all I ever aimed for," he said. "Not to win, just to share." The applause rose, not loud but deep, the kind that means something. Fiona, her usual sharpness replaced with sincerity, extended her hand. "Thank you, Clint," she said, "for this and for showing up." Clint shook her hand, firm and warm. "Showing up," he said with a faint grin, "is half the work." The cameras cut, the segment ended, but the conversation stayed. Final line. And that night, on a stage meant for debate, the world got something rarer: a conversation that mattered.